Thank you. Indeed, it's a pleasure for me to be part of this webinar. Unfortunately, we don't have 6G yet. Otherwise, I would have been teleported over there. And I would have been probably even shaking hands virtually with Ari. But since we don't have 6G, and because of Corona as well, we are actually talking, from distance. I am actually now in South Finland, and Ari is in the north part of Finland, in Oulu. Instead of me giving a talk about networking and so on, we have decided that probably I would be challenging a bit Ari about a few questions regarding, the general topic of 6G. First of all, I would like to say to Ari, thank you so much for that excellent talk that you gave. Indeed, you have said that 6G is the technology that we will be having by 2030, and indeed, every 10 years we need to have a new generation of mobile communication systems. But in your opinion, why we need even this global vision of 6G?
Why do we need the vision of 6G? Or why do we need 6G? Which one is the question, actually? If we go towards something, we need a vision, right? And why do we need 6G? Most likely, it stems from the fact that it's easier to sell. Next generation. And then I would say that mostly it comes from the disruptive new technologies when you go higher in the frequency. And it's sort of like a line drawn on water when you start to call something a 6G and something is 5G. We could easily go just like we have done so far. Every 18 months there's a new standard. And they actually talked about in Europe about smart networks and services, which is basically trying to get rid of this monolithic generations thinking. But when the marketing guys get in, they say that it's easier to sell something with a number, BMW 320 or 6G. So that's one of the reasons. But whether it will be certain things, we don't know yet. But we do know that when we go higher, we get sensing and we get imaging.
Yeah. Well, definitely the marketing aspect is there, or commercial need for it, for this new generation. But as you have probably touched upon in your talk, I mean, there are lots of issues that are still pending in 5G, probably that will define the beyond 5G. But in your opinion, what are still these hardest points or hardest parts that need to be solved in the context of 6G?
In the context of 6G, okay, so hardest parts, one of the areas is going to be the requirement for really developing new semiconductor materials. We know already that current technologies take us to approximately 100 gigahertz. And the aspirations and the vision of 6G is to take it to terahertz frequencies. Of course, it's obviously first it's going to be in sub-terahertz, but still there are a lot of material science that needs to take place before we get there. Second thing is the circuit designs and circuit technologies and the processes that actually can make these circuits and devices. Second thing is the softwarization of everything. Currently, it seems that all the networks are going to be softwarized. However, there are a couple of things related to that which I still find as a key challenges or key research questions. One, energy consumption. When you go to general purpose devices and spread them in millions all around the network, it will definitely increase the energy consumption in the networks. And the second thing is that if we have centralized networks that we've seen so far, the control of the software entities, these virtualized network functions, is going to be big mess. Millions of functions in the network, roaming freely, so to say, and that's going to be one of big research question.
Yeah, well, definitely you touched upon very interesting actually points that need to be addressed in the context of 6G, and I would say even before in the context of beyond 5G. One thing which probably maybe needs more work is this ultra precise positioning and sensing, which is probably needed in many services.
Oh
To
yes,
be
that's definitely true.
What do you think about that?
I find it very interesting. I'm not personally a researcher who looks at positioning or sensing or imaging, but there's a lot of research questions. How do we get below centimeter accuracies requirement, for instance, for collaborative robotics? I mean, those are immense research challenges. How do we sense, for instance, gaseous materials in some environment, and what are the algorithms to actually really come up with good tools? Is it AI? Is it some dedicated algorithms that actually can do that? So there are zillions of open questions related to imaging, sensing, and localization and positioning, which need to be solved.
Yeah, and earlier you mentioned that actually the whole thing will be softwareized. So we're going to talk about completely softwareized networks. And in this case, do we still have to talk about generations, or do we have to talk about versions of the software?
That is a good question. I still believe that the number game is there. I mean, if you take a look at, for instance, the Intel, now there is Core 10 coming out. Core 9 was there. I have Core 7 computers. So it's sort of like, who knows? I don't know. I don't definitely have an answer to that, whether there will be monolithic 6G or is it just upgrading software. But definitely it's going to be, or I think that the network should be more flat in terms of the architecture, so that you can distribute more, so that you can actually control it more easier.
Yeah, well, that's indeed, it's time only time will tell.
Yeah, yeah.
The other question which I have for you, Ari, is, I mean, still we as end users of mobile phones, we still use these mobile devices, which are probably, well, even if they are getting smaller, but they are still big. You know, mine is quite big, you know.
Indeed.
And you know, the older you become, the bigger the screen that you would need, and so on. Do you think, like in the context of 6G, we will be having this time when we don't need even devices, that probably our hands will become the device, or what do you think?
Hope so.
You hope so? I hope so
yeah,
too.
I mean, if you have a phone, it ties up 3 dB of your resources, half of your resources.
Indeed.
Basically. I mean, people walk like this all the time.
Yeah, so,
I mean,
so I understand
something smarter is required, and I believe that, for instance, these kind of devices could be the answer. It could be something else. I don't know yet, wearable in some format for human use. But of course, there are other users in the network, automotives and these kind of things, which then again offer, for instance, the glasses, the windows of the car that can be your user interface, or glasses. In a campus, you can touch the glass and get some kind of a user interface into the computing, communication, or whatever is needed. So a lot of new things will emerge, but which comes first, which doesn't, when things disappear, I don't know, but most likely these kind of things will happen.
Yeah, and I think one of the areas of the 6G flagship is services and applications, and probably this is one of the topics to be addressed in that area, right?
Yes, and we are looking at AR, VR devices, we are looking at holographic displays, we are looking at printed electronics, what that could offer us in the future, foil type of displays that could be attached to a window, for instance. So we do research with partners in this area where the current mobile phone form factor type of devices will be complemented by others, and maybe it means that at some time the phone type will disappear.
Yeah. The other question which I have for you, Ari, actually, I'm not very old, but I've been working on the 3rd generation, 4th generation, 5th generation, and now I have the opportunity to work on the 6th generation. And every time we always say, you know, that we're going to provide connectivity to those less fortunate areas, like rural areas and so on and so forth. But still, you know, we have, you know, big portion of this earth that we're living on, which is not yet connected.
Yeah.
And I think in your talk, you spoke about 6G as the solution that will reach out, those remote areas. Do you think that 6G will be the one that will fulfill this promise?
I don't know, but we are really pushing these UN SDGs into the research agenda so that people start thinking about it, measuring the impact, and try to come up with solutions that offer connectivity, at least in a frugal form, to everybody in the world. Currently, almost 4 billion people in the world is unconnected. So half of the people are not connected yet. So that definitely requires an attention. And what we are trying to push is remote area connectivity solutions and these UN SDGs to be taken into account when you do the system design. And Oulu University is just one piece in the puzzle. We are doing our part in the research, but there are other people in the world, companies, and eventually when it comes down to standardization, the companies are the ones that say, hey, how do we gonna do it? But we are trying to push for these new regulatory, legislative, and these sustainability type of value indicators that would, let's say, push world towards more equal and sustainable form.
Yeah. So I think we academic institutions as well as companies, we always strive for attracting skillful and really talented student researchers, personnel. In your opinion, which areas of 6G research and development need really new experts and urgently?
AI, of course. That is the technology of the future. But then radio technology, going down to these new radio circuit designs. I mean, we have Nokia, for instance, here in Oulu, who currently is looking for 100 radio engineers. So definitely radio engineering is something that you, in the future, would be employed if you study that. It's hard, it's complex, it's difficult, but it's rewarding. At least those areas come to mind.
Okay, Ari, I don't want to take longer time, but one last message I want to hear from you to the students, the researchers that are actually, attending, this webinar, and probably the ones that will follow it probably offline. What will be your last message to them?
If you are curious in your mind, if you are really prepared to work hard, then Oulu is one of the maybe 10 cities in the wireless domain, which is the place to be. So come to Oulu and you'll be surprised.
Thank you, Ari. It was really lovely debating with you.
Thank you, Tarik.
I hope that the audience enjoyed this discussion. And now I pass back to the guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ari.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Tarik and Ari, and for this very, very interesting discussion. Before I introduce our next speaker, let me focus on practicalities really quick. We just had the reports that one of the streams is unfortunately not working properly, and we just would like to make a very quick note that there is a second stream available for you. Everything you need to do is open up your video window, go to the top left corner, and select the secondary stream. The secondary stream is working perfectly, so if your main stream is not working, please change it to the secondary stream. And now, without further ado, please let me introduce our next speaker. Next up, we have the Doctor of Technology and Adjunct Professor in Data Science, Susanna Pirttikangas. Susanna leads a computer science research group at the University of Oulu, and she would speak about the unique learning and co-creation opportunities we have to offer. Susanna, just like I'm sure many of you who are watching us today, is fascinated by everything challenging and also by the related processes of finding solutions to those challenges. That's a great attitude to have, I must say. So, Susanna, welcome to the webinar.